Section B, Development Approaches to Discourse Analysis. So there are three ways of looking at discourse, but first, let us define what is discourse analysis. So discourse analysis is the study of language in use, but the way it is studied can vary depending on the perspective taken. So there are three main approaches to analyzing discourse. So the first approach is the formal approach. This view or sees discourse as the structure and organization of language that is beyond individual sentences. So it focuses on how clauses and sentences are joined to form coherent text following specific grammatical and syntactical rules. So analysis in this approach look at the formal aspects of discourse such as sentence structure and cohesion. So the second approach is the functional approach. So this perspective defines discourse as language in use. So it explores how language functions in real-world contexts to accomplish various tasks such as making requests, giving warnings, or offering apologies. So the analysts using this approach focus on the practical purposes of language and how we interpret the intentions of speakers or writers in different situations. The last approach is the social approach. So the social approach sees discourse as a tool for constructing social identities and relationships. It considers how language reflects and shapes societal norms, values, power dynamics, and group memberships. So this approach examines how language is used to assert power, reinforce beliefs, and navigate social rules and expectations. So with these approaches are often treated separately, but it was argued that they are interconnected. A comprehensive analysis of discourse should incorporate elements from three perspectives as language structure, function, and social context. All play a role in which how we understand and use language. Thus, analyzing discourse requires looking at not only how language is structured and used, but also the social practices and values it reflects. Let us further discuss the three aspects of discourse. So the first aspect is language above the clause. So discourse analysis at the above the clause level looks at how sentences and clauses came together to form larger meaningful text or conversations. So this idea was first introduced by linguist Zelig Harris in the 1950s. So before Harris, linguists focused on understanding words and sentences. But Harris wanted to understand how sentences fit together to create larger pieces of writing or speech. So in this type of analysis, two important ideas are cohesion and coherence. So when we say cohesion, it refers to the word or grammar that links different parts of text together. For example, using words like and, but, or pronouns like he or it, which help sentences connect and create a unified text. On the other hand, coherence is about how the whole text is organized and how the sentences fit together logically. So it is about making sure that the text follow a clear pattern that makes sense based on our understanding of how things should be structured. So discourse analysis helps us understand not just the rules of grammar but also how sentences and ideas are connected to create a smooth, meaningful flow of communication. The second aspect of discourse is that discourse focuses on how people actually use language. The concept of language in use revolves around understanding how people use language to achieve goals and perform actions in specific social contexts. Unlike traditional grammar-focused approaches, this perspective emphasizes how language serves social functions and helps people navigate their social world. There are several key scholars who have shaped this view of discourse. First, Michael Halliday focused on the social function of language, examining how it helps people achieve goals in communication rather than just studying its structure. We also have Justin Austin and Paul Grease, which laid the groundwork for pragmatics. So, this study of how language is used to perform actions like promising, requesting, or apologizing, known as speech acts. Next is H.G. Widowson, which emphasizes that learning a language is not just about producing grammatically correct sentences, but also about using language to effectively engage with the world and accomplish tasks. So, there are several ways to analyze how language is used in practice. So, discourse as action, it is where language is seen as a way to perform social actions. So, for instance, when we apologize, make requests, or give compliments, we are not just conveying information, but we are performing an action. Next is that discourse and activities. So different types of discussion influences how easily or effectively we can perform specific activities like business negotiations or casual conversations. So lastly, we also have strategic use of language where people often use language strategically to communicate their interpretations of situations or manage relationships. So, for example, individuals might use language to influence how other people perceive a situation or to navigate social hierarchies. So, um, overall, language in use focuses on the practical, social, and strategic roles of language in real life interactions, recognizing that meaning is often shaped by context and the goals of the communication. The third aspect of this course has to do with the role of language in social practice. The idea of language as social practice suggests that language goes beyond mere communication. It is integral to the way we form social identities and construct realities. So, people use language differently depending on their role in society, and this variation in language reflects diverse beliefs, values, and worldviews. For instance, an English teacher and a hip hop artist will use language in distinct ways, and these differences reveal much about their identities and social context. So this approach is heavily influenced by the philosopher Michael Foucault, who emphasized that discourse is the main tool through which knowledge is constructed and power is exercised. So according to Foucault, every type of discourse, whether in medicine, economics, or psychiatry, shapes our understanding of the world and governs social practices. So, discourse in this sense is not neutral but ideological. It serves particular interest, often reinforcing power structure by favoring certain groups over others. So, James Gee expands on this idea by describing discourses with a capital D as complete ways of being that include language, actions, values, beliefs, and social identities. So he argued that these discourses are integral to how we navigate and interpret our roles in society. A critical point here is that discourse is ideological. It carries an agenda that influences how we perceive and interact with the world. So, in this context, analyzing discourse is not just about understanding language structure or how people use language to accomplish specific tasks, but also about recognizing the power dynamics and the beliefs embedded within language use. So, therefore, discourse analysis must consider how texts are constructed or the structure, how language is used or the function, and how it reflects and shapes power and social identity or social practice. So these elements are interconnected and provided a deeper understanding of how language functions in society. So we are done with our discussion on the three aspects or approach of discourse analysis. Now we will be discussing about the cohesion and coherence. So earlier we said that one of the most basic tasks of a discourse analyst is to filter out what makes a text and what makes a conversation a conversation. In other words, to figure out what gives text and conversations texture. So texture, we said, comes from cohesion and coherence. So cohesion and coherence are crucial for making a text meaningful and connected, but they work in different ways. So cohesion, this is the set of linguistic features like references, conjunctions, or repetition that helps link sentences and ideas together within a text. However, cohesion is not just about these features. It also requires readers to do mental work. For instance, if a sentence uses a pronoun like her, the reader needs to mentally connect it to the correct referent earlier in the text. So in this case, you would need to know that her refers to Lady Gaga and not the speaker's sister in our example. So this back and forth referencing creates a sense of connectedness in the text, and the reader plays an active role in making these connections. Next is coherence. So this involves the expectations reader bring to a text based on their prior knowledge and experiences. A text has coherence when it meets these expectations and forms a logical structure that makes sense to the reader. For example, a shopping list must contain certain features. Diba? In our example, a list format nouns representing items to be bought. So to be recognized as such, the text must align with the reader's social and cognitive expectations about what a shopping list should be. So cohesion, or to make it easier to understand, cohesion relies on linguistic features that prompt the reader to connect ideas and follow the text flow, while coherence is based on the reader's expectations and the structure of the text, which guides the interpretation of the context. So together, they create a texture of a text, making it a coherent and meaningful experience for the reader. So let us further discuss the cohesion and coherence. So first, let us discuss the cohesion. So cohesion refers to the use of linguistic devices in a text that connect different parts of it, encouraging the readers to look backward or forward to make sense of the overall meaning. So these devices ensure that a text flows logically and smoothly. So cohesion is broadly categorized into grammatical and lexile types. So let us first discuss the grammatical cohesion. So grammatical cohesion, this relies on grammatical structures and connections. So the example of grammatical cohesions, we have conjunctions. So conjunctions are words used to connect clauses, phrases, or words showing relationships between ideas. So this conjunction has different types. We have contrastive conjunction and causative conjunction. So when we say contrastive conjunction, it shows a difference or opposition. And the causative conjunction, it indicates cause and effects. So next example of grammatical cohesion, we have reference. So reference involves using pronouns like he, they, or it to refer to earlier parts of the text, helping to maintain continuity. So, observe our example. So, the reference in language are ways of connecting words to their meanings or context. So there are three types of reference. We have anaphoric reference that refers back to something previously mentioned. Second, we have the cataphoric reference, which refers forward to something mentioned later. And lastly, we have the exophoric reference, which refers to something outside the text or conversation. So the next example of grammatical cohesion, we have the substitution. So substitution allows for replacing words or phrases, often using words like one to refer to a previous noun. In our example, di ba, a meat dress can be substituted with a hairy one. So next, we also have ellipsis, which involves leaving out words because they are implied by the context, making the text more concise while still maintaining clarity. The next one is the lexical cohesion. So lexical cohesion, this relies on the meaning of words and their relationships to each other. For instance, repetition can occur when key terms are repeated throughout the text. So repetition involves using the same words or related terms from a particular subject to create connections and coherence in a text. So this technique builds lexical chains that helps emphasize a topic. So in our example, Lady Gaga, who came under the fire recently for wearing a meat bikini, wore a raw meat dress at last night's VMAs. So here, the repetition of meat reinforced the subject of her controversial outfits. So taken together, these words form a lexical chain. So lexical chain are formed when related words are used together, such as using fashion, outfit, and dress in a text about clothing. So these chains help the reader focus on the main topic and provide clarity on ambiguous terms. So together, these cohesive devices make a text more understandable by guiding the reader through different parts of the text. So a text can be described as having tight texture when there are many cohesive devices, or loose texture if fewer devices are used. So writers aim to strike a balance between providing enough connections to make the text clear and relying on the reader's prior knowledge to fill in gaps. So the key is to know when to spell out connections explicitly and when the reader can make them on their own based on the context and prior understanding. So for our last discussion, we have the coherence. So coherence is the way we understand a text based on our prior experiences and knowledge. So it is not just about what is explicitly stated in the text, but also about how the text connects to what we already know. For example, when you see an advertisement with the word before and after, you instantly think of a transformation, often related to beauty products or weight loss. So this interpretation happens because you apply cultural and social knowledge about advertisements, especially those that promise a change from bad or before to good or after. So in the example of the ad, the image of a curved line with before and after is vague by itself, but the reader fills in the gaps using their understanding of beauty standards and advertising conventions. So the ad shows a transformation from an overweight body to an idealized hourglass shape, and this interpretation is guided by cultural notions of what a perfect body looks like. So this is an example of how our coherence help us make sense of the text based on external knowledge and expectations. So to sum up, Coherence connects the elements of a text with the reader's broader understanding of the world, influenced by social and cultural norms. So, without the interpretive framework, texts may be confusing or unclear, but with it, we easily understand how different parts of a text are related. To continue with the discussion of coherence, our next reporter will discuss it.
What is generic frameworks? This kind of framework is based on the expectations we have about different kinds of text, the kinds of information we expect to encounter in text of different kinds, and the order in which we expect the information to be presented, along with the other kinds of lexical or grammatical features we expect to encounter. Cultural models. Jane Paul Gee 2010 calls cultural models videotapes in the mind, based on experiences we have had and depicting on what we take to be prototypical or normal person, object, and events. The importance of cultural models in generic frameworks. It reflects the beliefs and values of a particular group in a specific context, and text reinforces these frameworks and habitual ways of looking at the world. So, generic frameworks are mental templates that help us understand different kinds of text based on our prior knowledge and expectations. For example, when we see a before and after ad, we know we know what to expect. The advertisement would show a problem first, the before, and the solution. It appears as the after. This predictable structure make it easy for us to grasp the meaning or the message quickly. Researchers such as Kank and Abelson introduced the concept of scripts, step-by-step procedures that guide us our understanding of activities. Similarly, Rumelhart describes schema, which are patterns we recognize in stories that help us predict what will happen next. So these cognitive tools help us navigate various texts efficiently. So what is cultural models? So cultural models are broader mental frameworks that reflect our understanding of the world. James Paul Gee calls these videotapes in the mind. They are based on our experiences and depict what we consider typical or normal. For instance, even though the Pope technically fits the definition of a bachelor, we don't call him that because he doesn't fit our cultural model of a bachelor. Similarly, cultural models about what coaches do and what an ideal body looks like help us interpret fitness ads. These models reflect the beliefs and values of specific groups at particular times and places. So every time we see ads or similar text, they do more than just reflect our existing cultural models, they actually reinforce them. For example, repeatedly seeing before and after ads reinforces societal standards of physical attractiveness and the perceived role of fitness coaches. This constant reinforcement shape our worldview and behaviors towards society. Genres and communicative purpose. Texts structured according to generic frameworks are called genres. Genres are means by which people achieve tasks structured based on communicative purposes. Moves and genre analysis. Overall purpose of a genre is broken down into steps called moves. John Swales identified 4 moves for academic introductions. First, establishing the field, summarizing related research, creating a research space, and introducing the body. When we talk about genres in text, we are discussing structured methods that help people achieve specific objectives. These genres are shaped by their intended purpose, which dictates how they are assembled. For instance, consider a before and after advertisement. It is intentionally structured to first display a problem, then present a solution, making the message clear and effective. Who is John Swales? He is a prominent figure in genre analysis. He explored how introduction and academic articles are structured. Rather than merely examining the text structure, Swales focused on what writers need to do to make their introductions effective. It is important to note that not all introductions will follow these moves exactly, and the sequence can vary, especially across different fields such as engineering and English literature. Recognizing these typical moves serves as a foundation for understanding how expert writers might creatively adapt them. So, bending and blending. This genre remains very conventionalized with strict constraints on relevant contributions. Genre bending. Atiyah defines genre bending as flipping conventions subtly to seem creative or unique. On the other hand, genre blending refers to blending as mixing conventions of different genres. Genre blending is all about adding a creative twist to a genre standard format. This involves subtly altering the expected structure or features of the genre without completely changing its core elements. For example, in personal advertisement, which usually follows a strict pattern or self-description, desired partner description, and relationship goals, an advertiser might inject humor or use unconventional language to stand out. This approach keeps the basic structure intact but introduces a fresh element that catches the reader's attention and makes the ad more engaging and memorable. So, on the other hand, genre blending. Genre blending takes a different approach by mixing elements from various genres to create something new. Batia 1987 explained this as combining the conventions of multiple genres to craft a unique piece of communication. In personal ads, this could mean blending the style of dating ads with that or car advertisement, using car ad language and phrases to describe a person. This mix not only grabs attention but also presents the information in a novel way, making the ad more intriguing and effective. So in discourse analysis, it shows how the strict rules of genres can be creatively manipulated to introduce new meanings and engage audiences in innovative ways. By bending and blending genres, authors can push beyond traditional boundaries, offering fresh perspectives and enhancing the impact of their communication. Modes, media, and context. Modes, it refers to writing, graphics, video, and other different ways to construct genres. In media, these are the platforms for producing and distributing genres. In discourse analysis, understanding how genres evolve with changes in modes, media, and context is crucial. Personal advertisements, for example, have transitioned from print to online platforms, significantly altering their structure and usage. This shift has introduced diverse modes such as digital photographs and videos, enhancing the dynamic nature of self-descriptions. Additionally, standardization through web forms has streamlined the information, making it easier to search profiles and keywords. Participants and processes. Text create versions of reality by including and excluding participants and linking them through actions, which we say process. So, in discourse analysis, understanding how participants and processes are used to construct versions of reality is essential. Authors promote ideologies by including or excluding participants and linking them through specific processes such as actions, saying, and feelings. For instance, cigarette warning labels demonstrate how different processes shape our perception of smoking. Initial warnings use relational processes and modal verbs to weaken the message, portraying smoking as potentially hazardous. Over time, warnings evolved to use more assertive language and causal processes, stating that smoking causes serious diseases. This evolution reflects the strategic use of grammar to represent reality and influence perceptions. Different countries employ various processes in their warnings, with some emphasizing action processes that depict smoking as directly harmful. This demonstrates how language constructs ideologies and highlights the importance of analyzing the grammatical choices in text to understand their impact. So, through this discourse analysis, we can see how texts are not just passively reflecting reality but actively constructing it, shaping our understanding and beliefs.
Okay, so let's move on to our next topic and let's start with constructing relationships. And the concept of constructing relationships in discourse analysis highlights how authors use language to establish connections with their audience and make information relevant. This is done through tools like modality and pronouns, which shape the reader's perception. For instance, using may, the word may, in cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health introduces doubt, while possessive pronouns like your personalize the statement, making the risk relevant to the reader. So, similarly, statements like smoking seriously harms you and others around you position readers as socially responsible, encouraging them to avoid harm to others. So, next, the texture of talk refers to how conversations are structured and how participants rely on shared expectations to make sense of communication. Conversation analysis focuses on patterns in talk, while pragmatics examines the broader expectations people bring to interactions. Herbert Grice's cooperative principle suggests that people generally converse in ways that are logical and understandable. This principle is supported by the four maxims. We have the quality or the truthfulness, the relevance or staying on topic, manner or the clarity, and lastly, the quantity or providing the right amount of information. While these maxims are not strict rules, violating or flouting them often creates a special type of meaning called implicature, where indirect messages are conveyed. For example, a person might imply something subtly to avoid hurting feelings or to manage politeness. However, not all violations result in implicature. Sometimes, people simply provide incomplete or false information without deeper meaning. The effectiveness of implicature depends on the listener recognizing the deviation and interpreting the implied meaning. For instance, someone might say, he has a lovely personality when asked about someone's looks, subtly implying their true thoughts. Floating a maxim within the framework of cooperation ensures the indirect meaning is clear, unlike lying or ambiguous statements that lack cooperative intent. Thus, implicature plays a key role in navigating the social and interpersonal aspects of communication. So, next slide we have here the how do we do things with words, and this discusses how people perform actions through um, through speech, focusing on the concept of speech acts introduced by philosopher John Austin. Austin observed that some utterances, such as "I now pronounce you husband and wife," perform actions rather than merely convey information. These utterances, known as performatives, bring about real world changes when said under appropriate conditions. Austin emphasized that the effectiveness of such speech acts depends on their force, which can be broken down into three types. First is the locutionary force, or the literal meaning of the words, and the second one is the elocutionary force, or the intended action, and perlocutionary force, or the effect on the listener. Austin further developed the idea of felicity conditions, which determine whether a speech act succeeds. These conditions include factors such as the speaker's authority, the conventional phrasing of the utterance, the willingness or ability of the listener to comply, and the appropriateness of the time and place. For example, only a licensed officiant can perform a valid wedding ceremony, and the individuals being married must meet legal and personal conditions for the act to be successful. Speech acts often rely on indirect communication, where the elocutionary force differs from the literal meaning. For instance, "Do you have a pen?" might function as a request rather than a genuine question. To understand the speaker's intent, listeners analyze the context and conditions surrounding the utterance. An example illustrates this process. If someone says, "I suggest you leave my girlfriend alone," the listener may initially interpret it as a suggestion. However, contextual clues such as tone and facial expression might reveal it as a threat. To interpret this correctly, the listener applies both Austen's felicity conditions and Grice's cooperative principle, recognizing the flouting of conversational maxing. Example, the maxim of quality since it is not a genuine suggestion. To uncover the speaker's true intent. Ultimately, understanding speech acts requires analyzing both the literal meaning of words and the broader social and situational context to infer what the speaker is doing with their words. This dual analysis helps navigate indirect or ambiguous communication, revealing the speaker's true goals. Next slide, we have the sense and sequencing conversation analysis, and this discusses conversation analysis, which focuses on the orderly nature of conversations, emphasizing their predictable patterns and sequential structure. Unlike pragmatics, which prioritizes logic and speaker intentions, conversation analysis examines how utterances are organized in relation to each other. Utterances are seen as actions, with their meaning derived from their position in a conversation rather than external factors like speaker identity or context. The central idea of conversation analysis is the concept of adjacency pairs, sequences of paired utterances such as question or answer or greeting. These pairs have a relationship of conditional relevance. The first utterance sets expectations for the second, while the second confirms the interpretation of the first. For instance, a question is expected to be followed by an answer, and a greeting should receive a greeting in return. The idea of preferred and preferred responses is crucial, as preferred response is the most efficient and expected reply requiring minimal additional effort, such as accepting an invitation with a simple "sure." A dispreferred response, like refusing an invitation, often needs extra effort to soften its impact and avoid unintended implications, such as adding an apology or explanation. Conversation analysis also considers how missing responses create meaning. For example, in the exchange, "I love you" or "thank you," the absence of reciprocal "I love you" generates implicature, highlighting what is left unsaid. This demonstrates that meaning in conversation often depends on expectations being met or violated. The structure of adjacency pairs allows conversations to function smoothly and achieve actions in an organized way. Even when pairs are complex or embedded within other pairs, their underlying organization helps participants navigate conversations. By analyzing the sequence of utterances, conversation analysts can understand how meaning and order are created dynamically within interactions. Next topic and next reporter, please.
Power and politeness. So, power and politeness focus on how people negotiate relationships using two key strategies. So, we have involvement strategies and we have independence strategies. So, under this, we have involvement strategies which aim to show friendliness, solidarity, or closeness, and it is often used to build or strengthen social bonds. Next is we have independence strategies. So it communicate respect, distance, or deference, and also it is used to acknowledge the other's autonomy and personal space. Next, we have phase system and expectation. So, interactions are guided by phase systems, which are broad sets of expectations about how people should act to convey power and intimacy. Under this, we have deference phase system. It is when parties are socially distant but relatively equal, and they primarily use independence strategies. Next is solidarity phase system. It is when parties are socially close and relatively equal, and they favor the involvement strategies. Next is the third one. We have hierarchical phase system. It is when there is a power imbalance between parties. So the first party is the more powerful individual tends to use involvement strategies to show control or familiarity. Next party is the less powerful individual, which is more likely to use independent strategies to show deference. Next, we have framing and contextualization cues in discourse analysis. First, we have primary frameworks, which stable expectation for specific situations. And number two, we have interactive frames, which is dynamic and moment-to-moment negotiation of what is happening in a conversation. So in contextualization cues signals that helps other interpret. So we have two. We have what we are doing in an interaction, and we have how our words should be understood. So we have two types of cues, which is the verbal cues. It talks about language cues, which is vocabulary, grammar, and topic choice. Next is we have non-verbal cues, which is the gestures, facial expressions, gaze, or signal shifts and activities. So let's move forward to the speaking mode. So we have speech acts, speech events, and speech situation. So our key concepts are speech acts, which is the smallest unit of communication. Next is the speech events, which is the communicative activity with clear beginning and ending. So under the, let's move forward to the model components of speaking. So first we have S, which stands for setting, which refers to time, place, and cultural and psychological context. Next is P, which stands for participants, refers to speaker, listener, audience, and bystanders, and etc. Next is we have E, which is stands for ends, which refers to goals and outcomes of communication. Next, we have A, which stands for act sequence, which refers to structure of communication, or what happens and in what order. And for K, we have key, which refers to tone or mode of communication. Next, we have I, we have instrumentalities, which refers to medium. It can be spoken or written, and also refers to style of language. We have N, which refers to which stands for norms. which refers to social rules governing interaction. And lastly, we have G, which stands for genre, which refers to type of speech event. For example, we have lecture, conversation, or debate. And lastly, we have practical applications. So under the practical applications, we have analyzing communication in context. We have understanding how expectations shape interaction. And we have distinguishing speech acts, events, and situations.
So now, let's proceed to the third component of the speaking model. The third component of the model is ends, which refers to the purpose, goals, and outcomes of the event, which of course may be different for different participants. So for example, between a teacher and a student, the goals of a teacher are not always the same as the goals of his or her student. Next, we have here the fourth component, which is the act sequence. So act sequence is the form the event takes as it unfolds, including the order of different speech acts and other behaviors. And then we have here the fifth component, which is the key, by which meant the overall tone or mood of the speech event. Key is important because it provides an attitudinal context for speech acts, sometimes dramatically altering their meanings as with sarcasm. At the same time, key is often signals in very subtle ways that are sometimes outside the purview of most linguistic analysis. Next, we have here the sixth component, which is the instrumentalities, meaning the message form, the means or media through which meaning is made. Speech, for example, might be spoken, sung, chanted, or shouted, and it may be amplified through microphones, broadcast through electronic media, or written down and somehow passed back and forth between participants. Typically, speech events include complex combination of instrumentalities that interact with one another and with the other components in the model. Next, we have here the seventh component, which is norms. So it is divided into two types of norms, which is the norms of interaction and the norms of interpretation. These are the common sets of understanding that participants bring to events about what is appropriate behavior and how different actions and utterances ought to be understood. The important thing about norms is that they may be different for different participants and that the setting of norms is often a matter of power and ideology. And then we have the last component, which is the genre, or the type of speech event. Although Himes' understanding of genre is slightly different from what other genre analysts like Swales and Bhatia, much of what was said before about community expectation, form, and community purposes applies here. The most important aspect of this component is the notion that certain speech events are recognizable by members of a speech community as being of a certain type, and as soon as they are labeled as such, many of the other components of the model like ends, act sequence, participant roles, and key are taken as givens. Now remember, it should be clear from this brief rundown of the components of the speaking model that none of them can really be considered alone. Each component interacts with other components in multiple ways. The most important job of the analyst using this model is not just about determining the kind of knowledge about the different components members of speech communities need to successfully participate in a given speech event, but also to determine how the different components are linked together in a particular ways for different speech events. For example, different kinds of participants are associated with different genres, or different settings are seen as suitable for different purposes, or different forms of discourse or media are associated with different keys, that the analyst can begin to get an understanding of deeper cultural assumptions about the people, places, values, power, and communication itself that exist in a particular speech community. B8 Mediations. Cultural tools. The starting point for mediated discourse analysis is the concept of mediation. The traditional definition of mediation is the passing of a message through some medium, which is placed between two or more people who are communicating. Mediated discourse analysis explores how tools and media shape communication and actions. It expands on the concept of mediation, which traditionally focuses on the transmission of messages through media like newspaper or television. To encompass the broader influence of cultural tools, including languages, counting system, diagrams, and even mental schemas, these tools, according to Vygotsky's theory, offers affordances or making certain actions easier, and constraints, which means making others more difficult, impacting the kinds of actions and meaning people can convey. For example, writing allows for revisions, while spoken language is more immediate. This idea of affordances and constraints applies to various forms of communication, including languages, genres, and social languages. The analysis thus focuses on identifying the action important to a social actor in a given situation, and how cultural tools enable to constrain those actions. This understanding is crucial because tools affect not only what we think but also what we can do. Access to specific tools like languages or electronic media can grant power and influence over those lacking them. While tools can constrain human creativity, allows for adaptation and appropriation. People find ways to use tools in innovative ways to achieve their goals, even working around limitations. The example of online dating profiles highlight this, demonstrating how users strategically navigate affordances and constraints related to image inclusion, revealing both the power of tools and the creativity of users in adapting them. Context revisited sites of engagement. Mediated discourse analysts call the situation where tools are used sites of engagement. These are moments where different social actors, cultural tools, and social relationships intersect to make certain actions possible. Mediated discourse analysis critiques the traditional focus on text as the central element of context. Instead, it focuses on social actions as the reference point. This approach recognizes that all cultural tools, including text, objects, and even machines, contribute to making specific action possible in given situation. According to Ron and Suzanne Wong's colon 2004, all social actions arise from the convergence of three key elements: discourse in place, interaction order, and historical body. Discourse in place refer to the available cultural tools, including linguistic and non-linguistic resources, that influence our actions. Interaction order describes the social relationship between individuals involved in the situation, shaping how they interact and perceive each other's actions. Historical body represent the individual accumulated knowledge, experiences, and habits that guide their actions. Example of crossing a busy street illustrate how these elements come together. Individuals must navigate discourse in place like traffic signals and street signs. Consider the interaction order, crossing alone in a crowd with a companion, and draw upon their historical body of knowledge and experience. The interplay of these three elements create the site of engagement where individuals perform specific action within a particular social context. To illustrate how these three elements come together to form the site of engagement of a social action, we can take the example of a crossing busy city street as we can see in the PPT. There is normally a lot of discourse available to people in this situation. There are things like street signs, traffic signals, and zebra stripes painted on the pavement to assist pedestrians in crossing the street. There is also a lot of discourse such as a shop signs and advertisement that might actually interfere with the action of successfully crossing the street. And so one of the most important things for people engaged in performing this action is determining which discourse to attend to and which discourse to ignore. The second element is the interaction order, the relationship people have with the people with whom they are crossing the street. If we are crossing the street alone, for example, we might take extra care in checking off oncoming traffic. Whereas if we are part of a large crowd of people, we might pay more attention to the actions of another pedestrians to decide when to cross simply by following them. If we are with someone else, we might find we needed to distribute our attention between the action of crossing the street and some other actions such as carrying a conversation or making sure our companion gets across the street safely. Finally, the action of crossing the street depends on people's knowledge and experience of crossing city streets, the habits and mental models they have built up around this social practice, which the scholars refers to as the historical body. Most of the time, we do things like crossing the street in a rather automatic way. When we find ourselves in unfamiliar situations, however, our habitual ways of doing things sometimes do not work so well. Most of us have found ourselves having some difficulty crossing streets in cities where conventions about which discourses in place pedestrians ought to attend to or what kind of behavior is expected from drivers are different from those in the city in which we live. B9 modes, meaning and actions. Multimodal discourse analysis. The analysis of how multiple modes of communication interact when we communicate tends to be divided into two broad approaches, one which focuses on text like magazine and web pages, and the other which focuses on real-time interactions. One important concept that is common to both of these approaches is the idea that different modes have different affordances and constraints. We introduced the idea of affordances and constraints in the last section when we said that different cultural tools make some actions easier and other actions more difficult. When we say that different modes have different affordances and constraints, we mean both that they have different sets of meaning potential and that they allow us to take different kinds of actions. For example, in written text and spoken language, we must present information in a sequential way governed by the logic of time. Thus, an author or speaker can manipulate the order and speed at which information is given out, perhaps withholding the certain facts until later in the text or conversation for strategic purposes. Images, on the other hand, are governed by the logic of space. The producer of the image presents all the elements in the image all at once and has limited control over the order in which viewers look at those elements. Similarly, images allow for the communication of very fine gradations of meaning when it comes to things like shape and color. The exact shade of pink in someone's cheek, for example. Whereas language forces us to represent things in terms of types. The word pink, for example, cannot represent an exact color, but only a range of colors within a particular class. The fact that different modes make different kinds of meanings are possible and other less possible is one of the reasons why people strategically mix different modes when they are communicating, so that the constraints of one mode are balanced out by the affordances of others. While there are some things that just cannot express in words, it might be possible to express them with a carefully timed facial expression or a carefully placed image. Ideational function. As noted in section A4, the ideational function of language is accomplished through the linking together participants, typically nouns, with processes, which is typically verbs, creating what G 2011 calls who's doing what's. In images, on the other hand, participants are generally portrayed as figures, and the processes that join them together are portrayed visually. Images can be narrative representing figures engaged in actions or events, classificatory representing figures in ways in which they are related to one another in terms of similarities and differences, or as representative of types, or analytical, representing figures in a way which parts are related to whole. In narrative images, action processes are usually represented by what Kress and Van Leeuwen call vectors, compositional elements that indicate the directionality of an action. In figure B91, for example, the arm of the boxer on the left extending rightward towards the head of the other boxer portrays the process of hitting. There are also other processes portrayed, for example, the upward gazes of the figures in the background create vectors connecting the spectators with the fighters. Like this image, many images actually represent multiple processes simultaneously. Figure B92, for example, also involves action processes. The face on the left representing a library user joined to the different kinds of resources he or she consumes, uses, evaluates, creates, combines, and shares. The image, however, is more abstract, and so the vectors are represented as labeled arrows rather than a visual representation of these actions. At the same time, the image also contains classificatory relationships. The object portrayed under the heading Information Literacy, Media Literacy, and Digital Literacy, representing distinct classes of things and analytical relationships. The smaller faces in the lower right corner, for example, portrayed as part of a larger social networks. Next is interpersonal function. Another important function of any mode is to create and maintain some kind of relationship between the producer of the message and its recipient. As we said in section A4 in language, these relationships are usually created through the language system of modality, as well as through the use of different social languages or registers. In images, viewers are placed into relationships with the figures in the image, and by extension, the producers of the image through the devices like perspective and gaze. The images of the child figure in B93 illustrate both of these devices. The camera angle positions the viewer above the child rather than the same level, creating the perspective of an adult, and child's direct gaze into the camera creates sense of intimacy with the viewer. Though the expression on the child's face does denote the same degree of uncertainty, another important device for expressing the relationship between the viewer and the figures in an image is how close or far away they appear. Long shots tend to create a more impersonal relationship, whereas close-ups tend to create feeling of psychological closeness along with physical closeness. Modality in images are partially realized by how realistic the image seems to the viewer. Photographs, for example, generally attest more strongly to the truth of a representation than drawing or paintings. However, this is not always the case. Scientific diagrams and sketches, for example, are often regarded as having even more authority than photographs, and black and white images like those often found in newspapers are often regarded as more realistic than highly saturated color images in magazine advertisement.
Textual function refers to the way different elements in a text or image are organized to guide the viewer's interpretation or reading of the information. In images, textual functions are conveyed through the spatial arrangement of elements. For instance, in an advertisement, the left side often contains given information, like the figures of a man and woman, while the right side contains new information, like the virus, helping the viewer understand the progression of ideas or the narrative of the image. Multimodality in interaction refers to how various modes, such as gestures, gaze, spoken language, and environmental cues, work together in a real time communication to create meaning and structure interactions. So, in face to face communication, participants use multiple modes like gaze, gesture, and spoken language to manage conversations and convey meaning. For instance, when a speaker maintains eye contact or gaze, it can signal attentiveness or control turn taking, while gestures may emphasize or clarify points. So these modes interact in dynamic ways, such as how posture or tone can influence the interpretation of spoken words, creating a rich, layered context for understanding communication. B10 procedures for corpus assisted discourse analysis. Conducting a corpus assisted discourse analysis requires a number of steps, which include building a corpus, cleaning and tagging the corpus, analyzing the corpus with computer tools using a number of procedures, and finally interpreting the data. So now these last two steps tend to be cyclical and recursive. So the first step in conducting corpus-assisted discourse analysis is creating the corpus, which is essentially a large collection of texts that you want to study. This step involves deciding what kinds of text you will include and ensuring that your selection is representative of the area you are studying. For example, if your research focuses on business letters, you need to specify which types of business letters, sales, sales or complaint letters, and from which companies or countries they will come. So, for more focused studies, such as those analyzing the works of a particular author, this process is simpler as the texts are already limited in number. So, once you've gathered your texts, the next step is to prepare them for analysis. This includes cleaning the corpus, which involves removing unnecessary code or formatting, such as HTML tags, so from the text that could interfere with analysis. Additionally, tagging is the process of labeling parts of the text or words based on their function. Example indicating grammatical structures or text sections like introductions, bodies, or conclusions. Tagging helps to categorize and identify patterns within the text, both lexical, words and vocabulary, and grammatical, syntax, and sentence structure, making it easier to conduct a more detailed analysis. So, after preparing the corpus, the next step is analyzing the texts using specialized software. Ankong is one of the most commonly used tools for corpus analysis. It is a free program that allows researchers to perform various analytical tasks such as generating word frequency lists and analyzing concordances, so the context in which words appear, and examining patterns in the text. So other software options like Smith tools are available as well, but Ankong is particularly popular due to its accessibility and user-friendly interface. By importing the cleaned and tagged corpus into Ankong, researchers can systematically analyze the data and interpret findings based on quantitative and qualitative criteria. Corpus analysis tools. Word frequency and type token ratio, or TTR, measure the occurrence of words in a text and the diversity of those words relative to the total count, helping assess lexical complexity. So, word frequency shows how often words appear in a corpus, while TTR compares the number of unique words to the total number of words. So a higher TTR indicates greater lexical variety, suggesting more complex vocabulary, while a lower TTR points to repetition or limited vocabulary. So concordances display a word in the context of its surrounding text to reveal patterns and deeper insights about its usage. So concordances show how a word appears in different texts, in different contexts within a corpus, allowing for analysis of word patterns and meanings. By sorting these contexts alphabetically, researchers can identify recurring themes, like how the word refugee often appears alongside quantifiers such as tens of thousands. Collocation analysis identifies words that frequently occur together, revealing patterns of meaning or association in a text.